All right, team, thanks for joining me again for the next tutorial in this series on Google Forms. In our last session, we talked about sharing a Google form with our students and the process of delivering to them a form that we had already constructed. Now we're on the other end of it, pretending that the class has had an opportunity to respond to each of those questions. And the question in your mind, the user, might be, well, what does it look like for me, the teacher, to receive that data? And that's the purpose of today's session. We're going to talk about what that data looks like. Here I am inside of a quiz that's been completed by 26 students. Up along the top, we have those original tools that we were used to: questions, responses, and settings. And this time I'm going to go to responses. In this space, it is not terribly different from what we saw the last time we were here when we looked at responses, when it was specific to the hour of code survey that was completed by teachers. In this space, it is quite similar. We have the ability to look at data from a summary point of view, from a question point of view, as well as an individual point of view. And then another layer of that is that because it's a quiz, it was self-graded. Google went through and utilized the information that we provided on the quiz because we established that answer key early on, and then Google supplied a point value for each of those questions as the students responded to them. So let me scoot down in here. Here's the range of data. We have a particular number of students who responded in the 3, 4, 5 category. We have a number of students who responded in the 8 category. You'll notice up at the top that the total point value for this quiz is 8. And so the point distribution is based on how the students responded. Down in this region, the student emails are located here. The actual score for each child is located here. And then when those scores were released is located here. And you'll notice right here that there is a release scores button. So if you have chosen to hold on to those scores so that the students receive access to those points after every single student has completed the quiz, so they don't take pictures of the right and wrong answers and then share it with their classmates via text message. If you want to wait to release those scores until everyone is completed, then the release scores button is located right here. And so when you, the teacher, have decided to release those scores, that data will be recorded in this particular column right here. You'll notice how there's a gray bar here. So as you scoot up and down this section, you'll have a chance to see all of the students. You only see some of the students right here. In this next area, the students were encouraged to supply their name. However, the button that said collect email addresses had already been ticked. So we essentially have 2 columns worth of names. In this next area, you can see that most of the students responded with 74,582 as the answer. And then you'll notice how there are a few other students who responded with a slightly different answer. So that was a fill-in. It wasn't multiple choice. And so the students weren't able just to use inductive, deductive reasoning to figure out which answer could be correct. They were required to supply the correct answer without the option of multiple choice. If the child supplied a decimal point instead of a comma, or if the child used a space bar at the beginning or at the end of the response, it would be classified as a unique response. Therefore, it gets its own column. In a situation such as this, the teacher can go in and override what Google declared as incorrect and supply the child with the appropriate points needed. Inside this next section, we see something similar as well. We see 18 students supplied this specific answer, and then the rest of the population supplied these adjacent answers. Moving on to the next one, individuals were able to supply a response, and then you'll see how those are distributed across this area right here. So in word form, if they supplied 1/8 of a gallon, depending on how you're receiving those answers and the answer choice options that you provided to them, you could find that there is more than one correct answer. For example, 90 minutes is the same as 1 hour and 30 minutes. And you have a variety of different users who are going to supply a variety of different written responses to suggest that very same answer. And so if Google has supplied a wrong answer, you, child, are wrong in responding to this particular question. You, the teacher, can override what has been noted as incorrect as correct if needed. Okay, so that's an overall summary. Over here, when it comes to questions, you have the capacity to scroll down and then figure out how individuals responded on particular questions. I'm going to scoot beyond that first question because it was student name. That was irrelevant. Let me now move on to question 2. Because this is an open response question, it is my responsibility to go through and mark all of the responses that are correct and incorrect. The points will populate accordingly for each child based on the marks that I provide here. This entire section right here is one specific question. The data that I analyze in this space can shape my pacing calendar and the strategies I use in the classroom. Likewise, the data in this area can shed light on which students need small group intervention or reteaching. When I scoot on to the next question, I have that very same pattern happening all over again. Students were able to supply their answers appropriately. Once those responses back, it is my duty to go through and determine which answers are correct and incorrect. Likewise, those scores will populate accordingly. The reason why there's no verbiage showing up here for question 2 is that if there was an image on display, then no language would appear in this space. For example, if the students were given a pie chart, a bar graph, or a geometric image, no language would appear in this space. Accordingly, the children would respond with numbers, fractions, percentages, an equation, or whatever response is most appropriate based on the original question. At this present time, I am only on question 3. If this were a quiz I were evaluating, I would move along to the adjacent questions and complete the process I have already started. For the purpose of time, I'm going to jump over to our next section. I'm going to scoot over to the section entitled Individual. Inside this space, I'm seeing information that is very specific to each student. By using this drop-down menu, I can hand select specific students from my class who responded to this particular quiz, and I can move from student to student utilizing this drop-down menu. The other option is that I can use the arrow right here in order to move on to student 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then so on. The third option is that I can click right here where it says the number 1, and by clicking on the number 1, I can type in a numeric value here. If I want to scoot over to respondent number 18, now I am looking at the quiz that was submitted 18th in the queue. It's not students in alphabetical order. It is the 18th student who clicked the submit button. Over here on the right, I can print that information if needed. Right over here, I can utilize the trash can. If you provided a child with an opportunity to retest, you are more than welcome to delete the first one and only utilize their second score as their final score. When it comes to overriding any child's individual score, first head over to Responses, then choose Individual, then locate the correct student using this menu over here. From that point, you're going to scroll down the screen in order to locate any specific question where the score needs to be altered. Find the point value area right here, and then either use the up and down arrows to change that value, or type the number into that space and then press enter. The other tool that I have access to in this space is by clicking on the green box right here, I am taken over to the Google Sheet associated with this specific quiz. Let me go ahead and click that now, and then in the adjacent tab, that information is going to populate. When that spreadsheet opens in the adjacent tab, I have the timestamp on when the student completed this task. Because the email addresses were collected at the time the student used it, I have an entire column of student email addresses. Google is going to populate the score information located right here, so I know instantly what that score is. If I asked the students to respond with their name, that information would happen in that next column. And then all along the top, it is question number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then any other questions beyond that if it moves beyond 6. And then each of the student responses are located in this area. You'll notice this gray band right here. If I need to scoot over to the right to gain more information, I can do that. And then if I need to scoot down in order to acquire more information, I can do that as well. I am not designing an entire tutorial on how to utilize Google Sheets. I'm so sorry. My main objective is to specifically talk about Google Forms. You can find a YouTube video on Google Sheets if you need some assistance in this area, but you do have access to this data if you feel that this data is also an efficient tool, not only to shape student learning strategies, but to also shape maybe your scope and sequence or your pacing calendar if needed. This is what the data would look like if you had multiple choice instead of fill in the blank. There are only 4 answer options, and item C is the correct answer, and you can see how students in this class responded. Likewise, in this situation, you have only 4 correct answers. Item D is correct. It's not only does it have the check mark next to it, but it's also green. 2 clear identifiers letting you know that it is the correct answer. The following responses are very similar in nature, multiple choice, and then you can see the correct answer illuminated in this very same situation. In the context of a PLC, whether or not utilizing a spreadsheet is most efficient or just simply using that visible data on the screen is most efficient, you can then collaborate with other educators to figure out why teacher A, B, or C had increased learning efficiency on particular teaching points. Hey, what strategies did you use that were a little bit different from the strategies that I used in my classroom? We had access to the same resources. I'd like to lean in and glean from your expertise because you're doing something and I'm curious about that. So inside your PLC environments, when you've got data that's easily accessible like this and easily shareable, it fuels and guides the discussion so that you can analyze what teaching strategies you might want to utilize in your own classroom. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. Please join me for the next one, and have a great day.